We have a couple already. Thank you very much. Start admitting people here. This setup here.
I know her.
Yes, you do.
I know.
Yes, you do. I just found out about that too. All right, welcome everybody to Free Thinkers Corner, Books and More. Tonight, our guests are Tess Gerritsen and Gary Braver. And I had this whole thing all set up, ready to go. And of course, I don't. Give me just a second. Oh, there it is. That's what I'm looking for. So we have, we're speaking with international best-selling authors Tess Gerritsen and Gary Braver, the two authors who have been close friends for more than 25 years, set out to explore the story of an affair that leads to murder, but from both the male and female's perspectives. The result of this collaboration, book called Choose Me, is a sexy, surprising, and suspenseful thriller, which is now out. And I'll show it to you in just a minute. Tess Gerritsen is the internationally best-selling writer of close to 30 novels, including her beloved Rizzoli Isles mystery series. A graduate of Stanford University, Tess went on to medical school at the University of California, San Francisco, where she was awarded her MD. While on maternity leave from her work as a physician, she began to write fiction. Now retired from medicine, she writes full-time and she lives in Maine. Gary Braver is the best-selling and award-winning author of 8 critically acclaimed mysteries and thrillers, winning the prestigious Massachusetts Book Award for his book Flashback. Under his own name, Gary Goshgarian, I hope I said that right. He is an award-winning professor of English at Northeastern University, where he teaches courses in modern bestsellers, science fiction, horror fiction, and fiction writing. Born and raised in Hartford, Connecticut, he now lives with his wife outside of Boston. Now, the collaboration book, Choose Me, is a psychological thriller, a whodunit, and a police procedural, complicated with multiple points of views. It will delight both longtime fans of those celebrated authors and brand new readers. Come along for the ride and try to solve the crime yourself. Gary and Tess, thank you for joining us.
Oh, thanks for having us.
Thanks for having us. Yeah.
So, Tess, let's start with you. You were a doctor.
Yeah.
You have an MD. What was your doctoring in?
Internal medicine, which I like to characterize as everything you can treat with a pill.
Okay.
You're an adult.
Oh, really quick, I did want to say to everybody who's attending, if you could keep your mics off and your video off, that just keeps down distractions. If you have a question or comment, please use the chat over here on Facebook Live. Again, you use the comment section over here. I know you don't have any video or audio, but use the chat and I will relay the questions and the comments. So anyways, so back to your MD. How did you go from being an MD to a writer?
I was a writer first. I was a writer when I was 7 years old, and I wanted to be a storyteller a la, Carolyn Keene, Nancy Drew, but my father told me that was no way to make a living. He encouraged me to go into the sciences because I would be able to support myself, and that's how I ended up in medical school. I listened to Daddy, so I went to medical school. I got my MD, became a board certified internist, but the whole time I knew that I was going to be writing, maybe as a hobby. I always imagined I would write on the side. And then my children were born, and I went on maternity leave, and I got to finally write my first novel. And that's from there on, I just decided that was what I wanted to do.
So what was it about the thriller mystery genre that drew you to that, to write that instead of like science fiction or some sort of medical?
Right. Well, I'm not smart enough to write science fiction, so I think what happened was that a lot of mystery readers, just like mystery writers, we love puzzles. We love to ask questions. We're very curious about what's around the corner or what's behind that locked door, and that is really what a mystery novel is all about. What's behind that locked face is really what I call it. What's behind the mask. And so that's probably what drew me. But, to be honest, I have written other genres. I have written romance, and I have written science fiction, and I have written historical. So it's very much what story is gripping me at the moment that I'm forced to write.
Mhm. So, what are some of your influences growing up that brought you to the mystery and thriller genre?
Well, along with Nancy Drew, Sherlock Holmes, of course. And I loved Gothic romances. You know, I don't, a lot of people aren't familiar with what Gothic romances are because it's kind of waxes and wanes its popularity. But it's really a mystery novel that involves a spooky house and usually a fairly innocent woman. And there's a mystery involved. So I love those. But then I also wandered into Tolkien. I was crazy about the Lord of the Rings, and then Arthur C. Clarke. So I think as a child, I was, not particularly limited to any genre.
So, your first medical thriller, well, this was a medical thriller, was Harvest, and it was released in 1996. How long did that take you to write? One thing that I found out doing all these events is second, third, fifth books, 6 months, maybe 8 months to get the book out. The first one could take anywhere from 3 or 4 years to 25 years in some cases.
Well, Harvest was my 10th book because
Oh,
I had written 9 romantic suspense novels before that. So the reason Harvest went so fast is that was my first book that was under a huge contract and it was due at a certain time. And so I sat at my desk and I finished that book on time. But it took me about a year, I suppose. In general, I've been writing about 35 years and I've written 30 books. So that's almost a book a year. That's
wow.
that has been my schedule up until recently.
Well, one of your big series, of course, is Rizzoli and Isles, and
Mhm.
I want to say that my wife is a huge fan. We've got this one here, we've got this one here, we've got this one here, and there's probably about another half a dozen or so upstairs. Um, Tell us how you got started with the Rizzoli and Isles series, and how was it different from writing a series versus writing just a single book?
It was never meant to be a series. It was a one-off. The Surgeon was this book that came out of nowhere. It was really about. I was, I always pay attention to what scares me, what bothers me, and one thing that has always bothered me is how much our medical information becomes known to strangers. Who you go to your doctor and you give a vial of blood for a test, and where does that blood go? Who handles it? Who is analyzing it? Who looks at that name and knows who this patient is? And so I had in my mind that maybe there's somebody really weird in the medical laboratory who uses your blood test to choose you as his next victim. So that became a book called The Surgeon, and I introduced a detective there named Jane Rizzoli. She's a homicide detective, and she was meant to die in that story. I had her death all planned out. And that's why I never bothered to make her likable in that first book, because she was a bitch and that's okay. She was meant to die. Who cares? But sometime during the writing of that book, as often happens, the characters started to grow on me. And by the end of the book, I couldn't kill her. I'm just like, okay, Jane, what happens to you next? So I wrote a sequel, and that book was called The Apprentice. And I introduced a secondary character in there called Maura Isles. And again, didn't I thought that was it. These 2 books were going to be it. But by the end of that book, I was really fascinated by Maura Isles. So I decided to write a 3rd book, and that, then you've got a series. And every book since then, I've just finished my 13th book in the series, has really all been about what happens to these women, what's going on in their lives. And then as you write a series, you start to expand your universe of characters so that all these other people come into these lives, and you want to know what happens to Angela, what happens to Frankie and all these other folks. So and that's what happens with a series, is it expands because your circle of friends expands in this universe.
Now, what type of research did you need to do for a series like that? Because I understand a standalone book, and you can do a little bit here, a little bit of research there, and that's it. But you have to keep it fresh. You got to keep it going and keep the adrenaline going in the book. You got to keep the mystery going in the book. How do you keep that going? How do you keep it fresh? How do you find the new? Um, is it ripped straight from the headlines type of stuff?
Some of them are, and I think what keeps it fresh is that people's lives are always in crisis. I mean, once your characters are happy, the series is over. So there always has to be something brewing in somebody's life, some tension, some crisis. And the other thing I try to do to make each particular mystery a little more interesting is I want to involve my characters personally in these things. So, for instance, in Vanish, it's what's personal about it is that Jane Rizzoli is about to have her baby and she's trapped in a hospital in a hostage crisis. So the hostage crisis is the plot, but Jane is very intimately involved in this whole thing because she can't get out. So if you can just find a way to draw your characters in personally for every single mystery, then I think it becomes much more engaging for the reader. The other thing is that I always try to focus on what interests me. And in the course of this series, I've had to research ancient Egyptology, for instance, that came into a story. And I had to look at, what is it like to go on safari in Africa? And every book, I think, brings in a topic that has been fascinating to me personally. And that is where I do my research. It's into things that I want to know.
Now, I know the show takes place down in Boston. I will admit, I'm sorry, I haven't read the books. I have seen the show though, but do the books take place in Boston as well?
Oh, yes, they do.
So,
And the reason they're in Boston, I live in Maine, but the reason they're in Boston is that we don't have enough murders up here. I mean, if I said it in Maine, it'd be like, Murder, She Wrote, where everybody dies in this little town. So I decided to set it in the nearest large city that might really have a really very active homicide unit.
have any of your fans, so fan feedback, you said you wanted to kill off Rizzoli right at the beginning, but she grew on you, and then you introduced Isles' character and this character and that character. Have you gotten fan feedback from about killing off certain characters, or they don't really like this character, or they love this character and are really mad because you got rid of that character?
Well, the one character that was continuing that I killed off, everybody was very happy. They were thrilled that I killed her. They said they couldn't stand her. Her name is Joyce O'Donnell, and she was kind of a nasty woman. And so they were glad she died. And well, I also killed off Maura's mother too, but again, another nasty person.
So, well, speaking of the TV show, how did that come about?
Like most TV shows, it happens sort of like outside the author's influence. I just got a call from this producer who said he'd been reading the novels and said, "I love your girls, and I think they belong on television." He hired a screenwriter, and a year later, the deal was finalized. I mean, he actually took out a second option. These things in Hollywood are they're so unpredictable, and you never know when it's going to happen. Every time I sell a book for film rights, I always just take the cash, and walk away and forget about it, because the chances are nothing is going to happen. So when Rizzoli Isles actually happened and went on to 7 seasons, it was a surprise every step of the way.
How much input did you have in the creating of the show and the continuation of the show?
Well, they based the pilot on The Apprentice, the second book in the series, and then one of the episodes was based on one of my short stories about Jane and Maura. But other than that, they had their own team of writers, and they were creating their own stories.
I think Angie Harmon and Sasha Alexander are a perfect pair, at least on TV in the show. They're a perfect pair. Did you have any influence as to or any say on who would play the characters?
No, I didn't. And because you haven't read the books, you don't know that they look nothing like my characters.
Well, that's what my wife said. My wife has said that the books pretty much are nothing like the TV show and the characters and stuff.
In the books, Jane Rizzoli is not an attractive woman. She's like an everyday woman who's got messy hair and badly dressed. And then she's played by Angie Harmon. I mean, you can't get somebody so opposite from that. And then Maura Isles in the books I think of her as a goth version of Catherine Zeta-Jones, and she's played by a beautiful blonde named Sasha Alexander. So Hollywood does what it does.
Now you have another. Looks like you had another movie out called Adrift.
Oh, that was a
1993 TV movie. Yep.
Right.
How'd that come about?
That was just, well, that was a spec screenplay I wrote, and to my surprise, it actually got produced after some time. So again, Hollywood, who knows what it was about that particular script. And I mean, I'm still working right now with several possible television shows, and every time I get involved, I think, am I wasting my time? Should I just be paying more attention to my books? Because you can't predict anything.
Now it shows here on your website too that filming is underway in Maine for your horror movie Island Zero.
Oh,
Is
that
that
was
still in?
2000, that was 2018. The film was completed. It was a very, very low budget horror film. Uh, that I produced and my son directed. We had a fantastic time, and I was kidding around on Twitter because we still have the monster. You know, we made a monster for the movie, and the monster sort of lives in the downstairs closet. So we dragged it out last night and laid it on the dining room floor to scare my grandkids.
No, that's funny.
They were
So,
properly freaked out. Yeah.
so for those who are interested in Island Zero, the inhabitants of a fishing island off the coast of Maine find themselves mysteriously cut off from the outside world after the ferry suddenly stops coming. All the phones have gone dead. Every boat sent to the mainland fails to return. When dead bodies turn up along the water's edge, the hardy band of survivors must find out who or what is killing them.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
without giving anything away too much, is just a creature in the water? Is it like an alligator or a serpent, a Nessie type thing, or do
It's
people have
it's
to watch the movie?
it's a creature that, well, you know what, we took a little bit from octopuses, I suppose, who are able to almost make themselves invisible. So the idea is that these are creatures that have not been seen because they've managed to keep themselves camouflaged, and global warming has brought them north.
All right. How can people view it? Is it on a
Yeah,
particular
it's
channel or?
viewable. Yeah, it's available on multiple streaming platforms, and you can just go online and you can find it on Apple, and you can also find it on Amazon.
That's the only time you get to say that word.
Yes, I know. Sorry, I know.
No, I let everybody have one, and in this case, it was not book related. So you also let me get this set up here. You also play the piano, and I have a little YouTube thing here. Oops, let me actually hang on a second. See if I can. I don't do this often where I put other things on the screen. No, that didn't work. There we go. That's what I want. All right. So let's do this.
No sound.
Oh, you don't hear it?
No.
Oh, all right. Hang on a second. Let me try this again here. There we go. Like I said, not often that I do this. Now can you hear it? No? Okay. Never mind
Well,
then.
I can
So
describe it.
describe it. Yes, you played the piano.
Yes, no, that is something I composed for one of my books. It's the book was Playing with Fire, and it's actually meant to be played by a violin, but I had a piano handy. And it was a piece that has to do with the Holocaust in Italy, a plot that came to me in a nightmare while I was in Venice. And I was writing the story, and it's about a woman violinist who picks up a piece of music in Rome, and every time she plays it, her 3-year-old daughter goes berserk and does something violent. So she wants to find out where this music came from because she got it in an antique store, and we also see the history of how this music came to be composed, and it's composed by somebody during the Holocaust. And as I was writing this story, I had to describe this piece of music, and I began to have nightmares about that too. And I woke up one morning with the music in my head. So that's how I composed the piece of music called Incendio. And you can hear it if you go online and just do go onto YouTube and look up Incendio and Playing with Fire.
Or you can just go on your website and see it. Plus, see all the other great stuff that's on your website.
Yes, right.
So, and actually, I showed it at the beginning. I guess my wife just tapped me on the shoulder. So, Playing with Fire is the book that you wrote it for.
Yeah, it's one of my favorite books. I felt it was quite haunting to write, and I still don't understand where it came from because everything came in nightmares.
I did listen to it before we came And it's very haunting. When did you start learning how to play piano? Were you a kid?
I was a kid. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm also a very bad violinist, but I know enough about the violin to be able to compose for it. So that's how the music came about. And it was recorded by a concert violinist named Suzanne Howe, who I remember I contacted a music producer and he said, I know just the person to record this music. And he sent it to her. And she called me up from Paris and she said, I'm playing your piece of music right now. My windows are open and there's a whole crowd on the street listening.
Hmm.
She recorded the piece of music and that's, if you go to YouTube, that's what you'll hear is Suzanne Howe playing this beautiful piece.
So we have one more question. As we came on and the guests were starting to appear up in the guest list, you were kind of excited to see a friend of yours, Margaret Porter.
Right, Margaret Evans Porter, who's another novelist, wonderful novelist, and we've known each other. Oh gosh, I can't remember how many years. Probably longer than I've known Gary. So, the community of writers. Once you find somebody who you like, it's like I think writers maintain long relationships, and I just wish I could see Margaret more often, but the pandemic has gotten in the way.
Yes, yes. Well, we do have a couple. I'll give a quick shout out to Margaret. We do have a couple of her books in the store. Her new one, I don't remember the title offhand, but is coming out in September. We already have it on our advance order calendar. So look it up. She's a fantastic writer. So we're gonna move on to Gary now. So Gary, tell us a little bit about how you got started in writing. Why mysteries? What some of your biggest influences?
I started writing in high school, and I discovered it was a lot of fun, but I had two uncles who were scientists, and their influence made me decide to major in physics at Worcester Tech. My sophomore year, I exhausted all the English courses, and I decided I liked that so much better than advanced thermodynamics. And I was writing for the yearbook and the newspaper, and I started a humor magazine. And I decided that maybe when I grew up, I would like to become a full-time writer. But full-time writers don't become full-time writers. You have to have a day job. So I got the advanced degrees in English and started teaching college. And you have 3 or 4 months off in the summertime. And I learned how to read by learning how to teach books, other people's books. And I was chomping at the bit for a few years. Fortuitously, my office mate was Robert B. Parker at Northeastern, and his desk was right next to mine, and I watched him spin out the first 4 Spencer novels. And I said, if he can do it, I knew he was my closest friend, let me try. And I had an experience that was a high adventure, scuba diving in Mallorca, Spain. We ran into modern day pirates. They attacked us underwater. Unbeknownst to us, we had stumbled upon, we were looking for ancient Phoenician and Roman shipwrecks on an Earthwatch expedition with a marine archaeologist who wanted to score big. And we were a few miles off of the backside of Mallorca, Spain, looking for wrecks. And of course, all the wood is gone, but they're ballast stones and it's artifacts. And we started fanning away the sand and coming up with artifacts, amphorae and pottery of all sorts. And a boat cut over bubbles and dragging pendant anchor chains trying to gaff us. And this was a black market operation by a local godfather on the island who on weekends would dive for booty on wrecks and would sell it to museums and collectors all over the world. And that became the roman à clef for my first novel, Atlantis Fire. As I said, officing with Robert Parker, he kind of demystified the process and write 5 pages a day. And then, after a year, you have a book. So I had my first novel came out, Atlantis Fire, and life got in the way. I had 2 children. And even though I was making princely wages as an assistant professor, I needed to make more to support the family. And I started some college writing textbooks. And so those ran 3-year cycles. But then in the 90s, things became a little easier. And the influences I lived about 5 blocks from the Rialto Theater in the south end of Hartford, and every weekend we would see horror movies, science fiction movies, crime stories. And the deep structure of my mind, in its sense, got affected by what I was watching. And I sensed that this is something I'd like to do when I grew up, and write novels that were of either science thrillers or horror novels. And I was teaching a course in science fiction. I introduced, in fact, on the first round. And the genesis of science fiction is Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, which has "Watch out what you wish for." And so that became kind of a motivating theme. And I was a physicist for a while, so I knew some of the science, and then little things triggered the books for me. My wife and I had new children in the next town in Woburn, Massachusetts. There was a carcinogenic swamp that was affecting children. And I said, what if something bad got in the water and affected our newborn? And that became the first science thriller called Rough Beast. The compound is from a secret military project that is trying to sterilize the Viet Cong in the Vietnam War, and it's a desperate move to end the war. And they bury it, they scrap it, they bury it, and it affects the kid's endocrine system, and he becomes like feral. I tell my sons this is not based on them, however, but and that gave me the theme of the next 5 or 6 novels. Watch out what you wish for. The publisher said, give us breakthrough kinds of things scientifically. I spent some time in Papua New Guinea, and I noticed that there were reps that were going to shamans' villages, giving them shells in exchange for miracle drugs growing on trees. And rainforests have very complex polymer molecules, and so many of them have produced Western world medicine, like quinine and digitalis. And I imagine, what if in a sector of New Guinea so isolated from everything, there is a flower that could prevent aging? And that gave me the idea for the next novel. And each novel, influenced by Ray Bradbury and Isaac Asimov and Arthur Clarke, they were in fact kind of inspirations for me, and the stories came out of things I heard, things I read. One of the interesting sources of one novel called Gray Matter, there was a factoid on CNN, and it said, if there's one thing you could change about yourself, what would it be? It'd be taller or thinner, or nicer, less mean. And 80% of the respondents said they wish they were smarter. And my antennae went up, and I said, ooh, imagine if you could increase the IQs of children who are slow. And it was in a period of time when parents were buying all sorts of computer games and software to play Beethoven and Bach to the fetus inside the woman's body, and they grew up to be a great composer. So that gave me the idea. And then little things you hear, as Tess said, you read something, you hear something, overheard conversation, it just triggers an idea, and you crank it through your squeeze box, and you come up with a story.
So let's see, you are the best-selling and award-winning author of 8 critically acclaimed mysteries, and you spoke about some of them, but these also include Elixir, Gray Matter, and Flashback. Flashback is the only thriller to have won the prestigious Massachusetts Book Award. Tell us a little bit about what that is.
A favorite aunt of mine got dementia, and we would visit her in the next town, her daughter and I. And as she was bumping down the staircase toward nothingness, she became just something attached to tubes and a diaper, and just babbling. All of a sudden, while my cousin and I were sitting there visiting her one day, she had lapsed into Armenian, our heritage, and she was talking to her mother 80 years ago from that moment, in a little thin violin wire little girl's voice. I mean, it just sent chills through my body. And it was, I don't know Armenian, my cousin does. It was articulate, clearly pronounced Armenian language, and she was talking to her mother some 80 years before that. And I said, oh my goodness, what if there could be a cure for dementia or Alzheimer's disease, and what would be the awful side effect? And watch out what you wish for. And the book Flashback, yes, it does. It could be a $50 billion pill, but it is rushed through the market. But the side effect is that in some cases, they relived some horrors of the past, like when you walked into the barn and you saw your father hanging, or you had a car accident, you relived that over and over and over again, like in a Mobius strip. And that became the idea for Flashback. And it got the award, which is, a great delight. And it was the first one of the thriller genre that got the Mass Book Award. Yeah.
Well, the other one that I had mentioned, Elixir, it was named by the editors of Barnes & Noble as a top 5 editors pick for the best medical thriller of 2000, a top 15 best 2000 horror and suspense novel. It was under, and we just happened to have one in store.
It's an old friend.
We were going through some used books that had come in, and like, you know what, that name sounds, I know who that is. So we have one copy available. And we actually have signed book plates from you that go along with the other book, but whoever wants this will get a signed book plate to go along with it. But it was under film option for 2 years by director Ridley Scott.
Yeah.
He did Gladiator and The Martian. It says that he didn't exercise the option, but it still continues to stir interest in Hollywood. Have you heard anything about, or has it come out in?
No, it came and went, but it was quite a thrill. And they kept it for a year, and they renewed it, and it was the reason why I ended up coming up with a pen name. They wanted to print up 10 times as many copies of Elixir in hardback than the previous Gashgarian book. And at the time, at the time, Borders and Barnes & Noble were the major sources of books in America, and to make it big, you had to hit there. So if they were to turn out Elixir with Gashgarian on it, they would base the sales and they print run on the sales of the previous book. So instead of under ordering, they said, change your name, something short and in front of the alphabet. And I suggested Stephen King. They said, that's gone. Grisham is gone. And I did ask them, I said, okay, I understand short. But why front of the alphabet? They said, science. If you are browsing and the new release book in one of the stores, you would stop around H. But if you're Zuckerman, you're looking for Zuckerman or Zanini, you have to go looking for it way back. So I went to the family tree. Gashgarian translates as shoemaker from the Armenian. That's 0 for 2. It's long in the back of the alphabet. But my grandfather, on the paternal side, name translated as brave or braver person. And I tested that with my kids, and my wife said, yeah, go with that, even though it's not exactly typecasting. Wimpy should have been your choice. So we went with Gary Braver, and that's what it will be until I stop writing.
Well, Publishers Weekly says about Elixir, Dorian Gray enters the world of biotech thriller. In a fast-paced and well-plotted debut novel, it tells the tale of a geneticist who discovers a miracle drug that reverses the aging process. Braver explores the moral and ethical dilemmas proposed by anti-aging technologies with compelling plot twists and down-to-earth writing that brings characters to life as ordinary yet complex people, an intoxicating read. So that sounds like it's actually, I may just throw it in my office for a little bit and take a read at it before I put it back on the shelf. So also your books have also been translated into, I believe I read 15 different languages, 10 different languages?
Mine 12.
12. Well, I was close.
I think Tess has every language on Earth, including bat and wolf and Martian.
So what's that like? Both having them printed in different languages and just the idea that you're an international best-selling author.
Well, the joy for me is having so many readers around the world. I mean, when I do international book tours, and it's funny you just never know which country is going to be crazy about your books. My number one fan base is in Turkey. And when I've been to the Istanbul Book Fair twice, and each time I look at that line of people waiting to get signed, and I know that I'm going to be there for 4 hours. It's
Wow.
thousands and thousands. It's 1,000 people, and they're only limited to one book that they can get signed. And and I have a pretty big fan base in England and in Germany as well. But I don't really understand what it is. Whether it's they chose a great cover, or that particular culture just seems to be interested in crime fiction. So it's a puzzle, and I think it's a puzzle actually about what makes a bestseller in the United States as well. I don't think anybody really understands. We've seen bad books become bestsellers, and we've seen fantastic books never make a dent. So what is it? What is the science? Is there a science?
Gary?
What was the original question, Chris?
Oh,
Seeing foreign
just-
books?
Yeah.
Yeah.
How is it having your books in different languages and being
It- it-
international?
It's an actual kick. I mean, to have seen Elixir in both Swedish and Norwegian, and then in German, and the titles become something other than what the original one is, and it's fun. Flashback became Memoria, and television became, in Portuguese, Visions of Death. I have no idea how they translate Boston jokes. I have no idea, it's kind of like, how do you say, that's wicked awesome in Hungarian, So, I mean, it's just, I mean, I have friends who know other languages well, and somebody said the Portuguese version, the Brazil Portuguese version of one of the books, translated very well. But I mean, it's a thrill, and I had done some signings in the Netherlands when Skin Deep came out. In fact, about 2 or 3 months after Tess was there. And it's a kick because they really treat you like royalty, and they give you a book that's in Dutch, and there's absolutely nothing, not a word in there that has a cognate or anything close to what I'm used to in English language. But it's really a kick, and I often wonder, you must have some really sharp bilingual people who really get in jokes and metaphors that you wonder, how do they translate? So it's an honor in many ways.
Yeah.
The Dutch read English.
They do. Yes. Yeah.
Well,
Very well.
it must be difficult to have your certain phrases and paragraphs and words and sentences being changed to, I mean, even just in Mexican, things are, a question, a sentence that ends in a question, the words are kind of changed around a little bit, so it must be pretty difficult for, like you said, for some sort of accents to come through, or certain, phrases that we have, everyday phrases that we have here. Tess, in your books, do you throw in the accent into your dialogue, or knowing that they take place in Boston, you kind of let the reader picture
I don't
the Boston accent?
I don't play with accents. I may fool with grammar. I may change the grammar around a little just to show that somebody is not a native English speaker. But I think that once you start playing with accents, you start to sound a little ridiculous.
Right.
Going to your question about translation and the difficulties of translation, it's really fascinating because there are some languages that are really hard to translate a book to. For instance, there are a number of books where there's feminine and masculine, and if you're trying to hide your narrator's gender, I do this and I do that, refer to themselves, you can do it in English. But then when they translate that into French, how do they hide the gender then? They can't.
Right.
So the first person hidden point of view is really, really hard. I did a little presentation once about translation where they took a passage of The Surgeon, and we brought in a French speaker, a Japanese speaker, and I can't remember what other language we had, and they all translated that same paragraph and talked about the difficulties of their particular language and how to move that. I mean, you can get a bad translator, but I think that the art of translation is so specific that they learn to trust certain people.
I just want to remind the folks that are watching on both Facebook and here that feel free to throw a comment or question in the chat or the comment section, and I'll relay it to Tess and Gary. So Gary, we met last year when we were doing Zoom events there, beginning to do them with the Sisters in Crime. How did you get involved with Sisters in Crime?
I think I might have been the first brother in crime. Back in the mid 90s, a friend of mine who was a sister in crime said, "Would you like to join an organization where you would, you'd have a camaraderie with a lot of other writers, most of them are female, and they were broadening out and asking males to join." And I did. It was fun, and there were weekly or bi-weekly meetings, and I got to, as Tess said earlier, got to be part of the writers group in particularly Greater Boston. There's a kind of a tribal affinity we have for each other, and read each other's books and promote each other and support each other. So it was great, and I've been part of that since probably 1995. Yeah.
Now I know there's some other mystery writers organizations. There's the Maine Mystery Writers. There's Mystery Writers of America. Do you belong to any of those other organizations?
Mystery Writers of America.
Yep.
Yeah, not Maine, the state of Maine one, but the
Right.
the basic one. Yeah, right. Yeah.
So how have you fared through the pandemic as far as not being able to go to these conferences and these get-togethers with people? Has it been a lot of Zoom events, or you're anxious to get back to be in person to these?
I'm anxious to get back to pressing flesh, addressing a group of people in a library or a bookstore. I mean, it's you say something funny and in little squares on a screen, and they clicked off the videos. You don't know if they're laughing or responding, or they're falling asleep. And it's the same thing with the classroom. I mean, I was teaching live in March 2020, and I went away for a weekend and came back, and it was suddenly Zooming until this past April. And I missed that too. We're going back in the fall, and hopefully we can get back into bookstores and conferences, but everything else was done remotely. So and we miss it. I'm sure Tess feels the same way.
I was gonna say, Tess, so what organizations do you belong to? Do you belong to the Sisters in Crime, or are they
Yes,
Mystery Writers of America?
Mystery Writers of America, International Thriller Writers. As I like to say, if there's a bar and a drink involved, I will show up. But now there have been, we haven't been able to do that recently. So it's, I think that everything is now so virtual, and I really miss, what I really miss most is library talks. I love talking to libraries because I always feel like these people love books, and they're there, and they usually come up with a lot of good questions, and a lot of people show up. So I do miss those a lot. But on the other hand, and I think most writers will say this pandemic has been pretty good for our work. We have been stuck at home. We can't go anywhere. And I've completed 2 books and a screenplay in the meantime. So this is probably more productive than I've ever been when it was pre-pandemic.
Right. Well, and having these type of events too, you're getting worldwide attention. If you have, so our bookstore, we've sold over into the Netherlands, and we have some customers in France and Canada and 26 out of the 50 states. So we're an international company. I love saying that. But having these events, we have people from all around watching them. So do you partake in any of these other conventions and stuff? And so that must be a plus, is to have something like this. I mean, if anything good can come out of this pandemic, besides getting a lot of work done, is a lot more exposure without having to leave your house.
Well, I think we've become a lot more facile with technology. I don't know about Gary, but I'm a pen and paper kind of gal. So I like to write the old-fashioned way. I go to the computer when I have to, and this has forced us to learn about Zoom and all these other streaming services and all these other connectivity ways that I was not really comfortable with. And now I can do Instagram, and now I can do live Facebook, and it's all kind of futuristic and science fiction-y, but it serves a purpose. Unfortunately, it's still not, as Gary said, pressing the flesh or being able to look into a face and not have them on a screen.
Right.
I will say we've only been open for 3 years, and I wanted nothing to do with social media ever. But I've taken a crash course over the past 3 years on how to do. And as soon as I think I got it figured out, something new comes along. So I'm just sticking to the main three: the Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. I don't dance, so I'm not doing TikTok or anything like that. Um, but yeah, it's. I mean, for people of our generation, it's been well, crash course in learning how to use technology, unless it's something that you are interested in the first place
Well,
and have
it
always been following it.
I think it also makes us feel really vulnerable. I don't know
Mhm.
if my modem goes out or something like that. So I'm cut off from the world.
Mhm.
I can't I can't do FaceTime. I can't do this. I can't do that. So everything feels like we're all hanging on actually a thread of a cable. And when that gets cut off, we might as well be on a desert island.
Mhm.
All right, so let's move on to why everybody's here. Well, I mean, besides everything else, but your latest book, this collaboration between the two of you, Choose Me. Let's see, Taryn Moore is a young, beautiful, and brilliant. So why would she kill herself? When Detective Frankie Loomis arrives on the scene to investigate the girl's fatal plunge from her apartment balcony, she knows in her gut there's more to the story, especially after the autopsy reveals that the college senior was pregnant. It could be reason enough for suicide or a motive for murder. So you've known each other for well over 25 years. Well, let's start with this. How did you meet?
A writers conference, I think.
And
It was
Concord, Massachusetts, right? Yeah.
yeah.
So has something like this always been kind of in the works? Was this something recent to do a collaboration on a book?
Neither one of us had ever collaborated on a novel before. This was okay. I'm going to give you the backstory of how this happened because this is my problem of cocktails and bars. Okay, we were at a cocktail party in Boston at a bookstore, and we were both following the Me Too movement, which was getting a lot of publicity back then. And a lot of very famous men were falling by the wayside for having done naughty things. And I was talking to Gary about wouldn't it be interesting to do a book about the Me Too movement, but not the black and white, this is bad and this is good, but the gray areas where it's not always clear that you have that you actually have somebody who's the bad guy. And wouldn't it be interesting to tell this story from the female point of view and the male point of view? So they are both looking at the same situation, but from different points of view. And maybe a woman should write the woman's point and the man should write from the male point of view. What would that book look like? So then Gary got excited. We said, well, let's try this. It was the whole thing is an experiment that we just didn't know what we were getting into. All we could agree on was that it would be a university professor because that is Gary's real job. I mean, he knows that world. And it would be an inappropriate relationship with a student and the student would end up dead. I think that's all we agreed on. And then I went home to Maine. And then Gary sent me a chapter a couple weeks later. And I thought, oh, well, he's already started. I guess I better write a chapter too. And so we ping pong back and forth. It was all done online. He wrote a chapter, then I would write a chapter in response to that chapter. And it was kind of like upping the stakes with every time we had another go around. So it really didn't start off as a police procedural at all. This was not, in fact, when I look at it, I don't really see it as a mystery novel. I see it almost as it's a book, a meditation on guilt. It's really what it is, because we have a man who's done something terrible. He's married, so he's betrayed his wife and his university rules. But what about the woman? What about Taryn Moore, the college student? What is her culpability in this relationship? So I think that's how it ended up. We saw it as a train wreck, and we wanted to see how two people can make their lives as bad as possible, and how do they recover from that.
We have one local author here from South Berwick uh, who does a long distance collaboration with a friend out in California, and they're working on their second or third book now. It must be pretty easy though easier with you two being close by, Maine and Massachusetts. Did you ever get together, or is it all done? Speaking of technology, was it all done through emails and videos? And
It was all email. I mean, a test could have been in Madagascar. I mean, we never needed to be in the same room. I think we talked once or twice over the year and a half to 18 months it took us to write the book, but it was all on email. And it was easier in the sense of when I was stuck or she said, what do you think we should do? The other person would chime in. But it was harder in melding the two different styles. And also, as Tess said, we didn't quite know who did it. It's a who done it, but we got, 2/3, a half or 2/3 through. And well, we have 4 or 5 candidates here. Who do you think we should make the bad guy? And then you begin to examine motivations of each different character. Well, this one or that one. And we began to, check the boxes and eventually eliminate all but one. And we realized that this solution is the best. It would resolve the book's issues. It would not be pulling a rabbit out of the hat and pulling a fast one on the readers. And going back to what Ted said earlier, this, even though it is billed as a murder mystery and that invites readers to try to guess who did it, it really is a novel of characters. It is a psychological thriller mystery, not thriller, but there is an element of dread in it toward the end. But it's a psychological novel that examines the motivations and backgrounds of people for why they do what they do. Jack is a college professor. He's happily married. His wife is devoted to her medical practice, which she lives on a treadmill and comes home completely scooped out, and very little time for them as they used to be, very little time for romance. So it makes him feel like he's a bachelor again. And here is this attractive, very bright, flattering, adoring, beautiful woman in his class who's very smart and wants to grow up and be like him and teach college. And she's available. And, he begins to fantasize, but he knows he's the adult in the room and is fighting the impulse. But flesh is weak, and eventually they become lovers. And most of Jack's story is after that event, and how guilt sets in, and you get to see the complexity of his character, as with Tess did for Taryn, the complexity of her character, and how their backgrounds fit into their makeup. That really is a novel of character, as well as fulfilling the genre as a murder mystery.
Now, there's a couple terms when I first started doing these Zoom events way back in September. There's a couple terms I learned: pantser and plotter. Tess, are you a pantser? Are you a plotter? Gary, same question to you. And if you're of opposite ends, how did you come up with the structure for the book? I know you did the woman's side, you did the male side, but how did you come up with the structure of the book?
I'm a pantser, and I think that Gary is more of a plotter. So that was one of these things where I'm sure it drove him crazy that I had no idea what was going to happen next. And he wanted to know, he needed to know. So Gary, you talk about how difficult it was working with a pantser.
It was, but the thing is, each chapter that I wrote was generated from a previous chapter that Tess wrote. So she would, in many ways, consciously or unconsciously, set me up. So I got a direction from what has been, and it just worked. I just kind of intuited where it's going to go next. Once in a while, I would ask Tess, "What do you think about this?" And she'd say yes or no. Or, "How about this?" But interestingly enough, and Tess will probably elaborate on this, the book was written chronologically. I mean, from A to Z. And our editor, Gracie Doyle, who is just a brilliant, wonderful editor, fell in love with the character of the homicide detective, Frankie Lewis, that Tess introduced way into the book. And she said, this is too great a character to wait to chapter 20 to emerge. And we know this is a murder mystery. We know that Taryn is going to die put her body up front and bring Frankie Loomis in. And Tess, you can go from there, because that is what gave us the new structure, the final structure of this book.
Yeah, that was that suggestion by an editor, and sometimes editors say something that makes your head explode and go, yes, why didn't I say that?
Right.
So yes, so we moved the death of the young woman right to the very first chapter. And we introduced Detective Loomis, who was one of my favorite characters. She's a middle-aged female detective who's been at it for a while. She's got two teenage girls that are challenging to her. So she has a mother's instinct, and she walks onto this crime scene and says, something is wrong here. This does not look like a suicide to me, Mom. So that is how we open it. We open it, as we say, we open it with the train wreck, and then we pull back and see, how did that train get wrecked? So that's how we get this before and after, changing time cuts. And the difficulty of that was we had written it in chronological order, and now I had to go back and reorder everything and make all the little pieces fit, and make it in such a way that you don't reveal too much early on in the story. But I think that the final platform that we have it on, which is after before, really turns it into a deeper thing. I feel like you're always peeling back the layers of an onion as you're reading this story this way.
Now, Tess, you write primarily crime thrillers. Gary, from what I got, yours are more sort of science fiction, technical and stuff. So you definitely have two different, and just in general too, even if you were the same genre, writing styles. Were you able to mesh those two styles? And you're talking about the woman, you're talking about the man, so you know who's writing which part. But to make it all kind of feel like one. Did you try to make it feel like one writer, or did you try to keep it separate? I guess Frank Herbert, he wrote the Dune series. I love the books. I love the way he wrote. But then when his son took over after Frank's death and did the prequels and the sequels, you can definitely see a difference in the writing style. So you knew who wrote what. Did you try to mesh your two writing styles together, or?
I think there are two different things here. One is point of view, and one is style of writing style. The point of view of Taryn and Frankie were all controlled by Tess. Point of view of Jack was me projecting from aspects of me and how I imagine things would happen with him. So I constantly was in Jack's head, and occasionally Tess would suggest changes in his point of view and the way he is seeing things, what he is saying, what he is doing. But pretty much that stayed intact, just as the chapters of Taryn, the chapters of Frankie stayed intact. When it was done, Tess did a kind of overview editing job, making sure the style of writing was appealing to her readership. I mean, 80% of the readers of Tess's books are female from age 55 and up, if you look at the demographics we heard of. And so she did some of the smoothing out of the actual writing styles, but did not alter that much the basics of the point of view of the character of Jack. That seems fair enough, Tess?
Yeah. That's about it.
So during that process, did you ever say, you know what, I don't really care for the way you wrote this particular sentence or paragraph, I think it should go this way? And Gary, did you say, no, because this is what I'm trying to say, I want to keep it this way? How many times and how often did you two butt heads about whatever?
Yes, Tess, whatever you say.
that happened. And mainly because there would be things that Jack, the character, would say or do that I felt would be offensive to female readers. And I slapped Gary on the hand and said, no, you have to pull Jack back in here.
And I said, yeah, I was a boss.
Yes, make it more appealing to female characters and make it less sexualized, because, and this is something, and this was the whole point of this project, is I wanted to learn how men would think about a situation and how that would be different from what a woman would think. And I learned some things. I mean, I learned that men are much more sexualized in their thinking, that when they meet an attractive female for the first time, even if she's fictional, that they they may focus on different things than a woman would focus on when she meets an attractive man. So there were these lessons that I think we both learned about the opposite sex, and about what maybe Gary also learned, what things a male writer writes that may tick off a female reader.
Sure. Yeah. I did learn that. Yes.
So
I am now officially liberated.
So what's the structure of the book? Is it one for one, chapter for chapter, or do you do a couple chapters, Tess, and then Gary does a couple chapters, go another chapter for Tess, and then a couple more for Gary? How does that
I
flow?
think that the overall work was about 50-50. It doesn't necessarily mean Jack Tarrant. Jack may have a couple of chapters at a time. It really depended on the rhythm of the story.
So kind of going back to what you were talking about your readers and getting into the sort of the psyche of males and females, when you were going through the editing process, did you, what are they called? Sensitivity editors, or
We did.
Did you have somebody who did
the
that?
publisher, actually, the publisher had sensitivity readers. And I think that's probably standard now for every book that's published, it seems. Although this is a new thing for me. I've never had this happen before. And they pointed out a few things, descriptions of an overweight boy. And she thought that what I wrote was not sensitive. So I did change that. I can't remember what else there was, but it does seem that every large publisher now does employ sensitivity readers.
Yeah.
How do you feel about that though, when you're writing, let's say you're writing something for a particular era, so just let's say the 80s or 90s, whatever, and a overweight boy would have been referred to in a particular way in that era, and you're trying to portray that in the book. Do you, as the author versus the sensitivity editor, have any say and say, look, this is the way it was, or would you go ahead and let it be softened or changed accordingly to today's time?
It depends on how important this battle is to you. I mean, the truth is, the remarks that were offensive to this reader were the thoughts of a character about another character. And I felt that what Taryn would have thought about this overweight boy would have been probably exactly what she would have thought. But so I did give in on that particular item. I can see why it might make people offended. But on the other hand, when we're writing about characters, writing about the thoughts of characters, they go where they want to go. These are people who exist in our own minds, and they may think something about a character of another race or another culture, and that's not us. Mm-hmm. That is the person we're writing about.
So who decided, or how did you decide on the setting, what city it takes place in, and how the characters look, the character development, like I said, the town, the surrounding businesses and streets and things like that? How did you go about deciding all that stuff?
That was Gary, because he's talking about his home turf.
Yeah, right. I mean, I know Boston well, and I positioned the school called the Commonwealth University in Boston, pretty much near where I teach. It's across the street from the Museum of Fine Arts. And so we use a locale because I'm familiar with it, and we can move around from here to there. And it had an authenticity about it. If we move it to Racine, Wisconsin, we have to do an awful lot of research online. So you set things where you're comfortable and you're familiar with, and that's what we did. The way people look. I mean, I base some things on people I teach with, and I went from there. But you're always drawing from your own experience and exaggerating it or developing it for whatever needs the story calls for. Yeah.
Right. So Tess, how did you come up with your character?
Which one? Frankie the detective is essentially Jane Rizzoli in 20 years. That's how I see her. She's seasoned, she's a mom, she sees things, and she has a secret. Her motherhood is her secret power. Taryn was a far more difficult character because I wanted I wanted her to be obsessive, because she becomes a really scary character about halfway through the story. She falls in love with her professor. He tries to end the affair, and she is not going to let him. So, what is it about her that we can both identify with, but also be afraid of? And I think that probably all of us have had a boyfriend or a girlfriend who wasn't going to let go. Somebody who drives by your house after you've broken up with him and just wants to see what you're up to, wants to know who you're dating, maybe stalks you on Facebook. I think people do this all the time. So I just used that model and just pushed it a little higher. So Taryn is a bit of a stalker, but she's in love with this man. She doesn't think he really wants to break up with her. She really thinks that they're going to end up happily ever after. And she will do everything to hold on to her married lover, including destroy his marriage. So that's where Taryn comes from. But on the other hand, I also wanted you to feel sympathy for her. And because of that need to have sympathy, I made her start off as somebody who's been abandoned. Her father walked out on the family. Her boyfriend just dumped her. So she is really wounded. She's wounded and she's hurt and she needs comfort, and she finds it in this married professor.
Now, when you were going back and you were reading through your portion and doing some edits and stuff and developing the characters, did you ever think, "Ooh, that sounds like so and so. Maybe I shouldn't add that, or I should change this"?
Yeah, she's an amalgamation of people I know, and I think we all know scary people like this. We all know people like this, and we hopefully don't have them in our lives right now. But that's just life,
Yep. So Gary, for Jack, how did you come up with and develop his character? And the same end question. And when you sat back, did you say, "Oh, okay, maybe I should change this because it sounds too much like so and so"?
Jack is a bad boy me. I mean, I like to teach. Jack likes to teach. I am very happily married. He is very happily married. I know right from wrong. He knows right from wrong, but he does wrong. So that's the bad boy part. And I'm also familiar with the history of professors who had dated students. And when I first started teaching at Northeastern years and years ago, it was common. A professor, an instructor would date a student in his or her classroom. Three of my colleagues ended up marrying students that they had in class. And people looked the other way. It is unfair. It's favoritism. You could barter sex for grades. And so it was only after the Title IX initiative in colleges and universities that people realized this is terrible discrimination against particularly women, because male professors have been dating or ogling or having sex with students, female students, and that is absolutely verboten now. And years ago, maybe 20 years ago, a professor in another department was caught trading sex for grades or grades for sex, and he was terminated. Now it is absolutely part of the regulations that if you are in any kind of romantic relationship over whom you have the authority of grades or the thesis advising, you will be terminated. There is no second chance. And Jack knows that. Jack knows that having an affair with a student is a violation of his marriage vows. It's a nasty thing to do to your spouse. It's a terrible thing to do with a student who is half your age. You should know better. So I know these things. I wouldn't do what he did, but I haven't had the same kind of moral compass, the same kind of affection for his wife, and the sense of guilt that is what I think humanizes him and perhaps makes him sympathetic to the female readership that we address. Yeah.
So what type of research did you do then for
having
those
sex with
amoral those amoral things that he does?
Yeah, there was no research. I mean, I just imagine what I would be doing were I Jack, and what I would face as consequences. And that is kind of the dread element that happens after he and Taryn get together. What if my wife finds out? what if my dean finds out? What if any other students find out? I am toast, and the two pillars of his existence, his marriage and his career, would be toppled. And so he is constantly on pins and needles. And then Karen turns up dead. He may be a prime suspect. So I mean, I know guilt, I know fear, and he just kind of maps that into the story and get that part of his interior narrative, the kind of oh no moments, which we've all had.
So Tess, is this what you were talking about by you realize getting into the head of a man or something that was kind of eye-opening?
I think what was not eye-opening, because we all understand guilt, and we all understand that we do bad things. People do bad things, and how do you recover from it? And why would a mistake ruin your life? That's what we were exploring. How bad can it get? As writers, we're always going down that tunnel. How bad can it get? We always try to make it worse and worse and worse. And Gary's challenge in this was the tough part. Was making this man, Jack Dorian, who has done a bad thing, how do we learn to like him? How does that become a sympathetic character to readers? And it is a challenge. It's a terrible challenge, because readers think they want good guys. They think they want people who never do wrong. And that's not realistic. So we were trying to introduce a character who is more human, someone who has made a mistake. Are you still going to like him? Well, if you don't like him, then you must not like real people. That's all.
Now, separately, you probably have your own beta readers. Did you use those beta readers for this? Do you not use beta readers at all? Do you have friends who know both of you and look to them before you turn it over to editors?
I don't have beta readers.
I don't have beta readers either. No, my wife. That's it. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. Well, there goes the next question.
My husband and spell check. That's it.
So how many edits did this have to go through before they said, okay, this is good to go?
I lost count. I'm sorry.
Yeah, right.
I don't remember. I do not remember, because we had so many versions and so many edits, and then there was the reimagining of the time frames, and gosh, I'll just say this book took longer than any book I've ever written by myself.
Well, that was the next thing. How long did this take?
2 years.
18 months to 2 years. Yeah.
Wow. Now I interviewed an author, and she said that when the final edit comes back, or maybe it was even for the first edit, at some point she goes and she reads out loud the entire manuscript to see how it sounds. Certain phrases, certain words. Does this word or this phrase work in this particular sentence? Do you do anything like that, either with this one or with any of your other books?
I have an inner voice in my head that reacts very well, not having to say things out loud. I really know how things sound to me. If it has, kind of a rhythm, it's fluid. It has kind of a punchiness at the end of the sentence, and I'm good at that because I've been teaching literature for 50 years, and I have internalized the sound, but I don't read stuff out loud. Even though in class, I would pick out a passage of someone's book and I'd say, listen to this. This really is beautifully written. And it has a kind of a crescendo quality to this paragraph. And it ends and it gets, this is what kind of, oh, wow, that is really good writing. But I can do that in my head. I don't have to hear myself reading out loud.
Yeah. I don't do it either.
No. So what's the next step for Choose Me? Are we looking at a TV movie or a big screen movie? Has anybody been approached?
It's being pitched by our film agent now. So, yeah.
If there's a God, answers prayers.
So one of the things that I like to end, and we're not yet at the end, but the one thing I kind of like to ask for those who are coming out with new books and stuff, but we'll go with this one here. So the movie's it's being out there, it's being floated around. Who would you like to see as the characters? What movie stars or TV stars would you like to see portray your characters?
For for Jack, either Bradley Cooper or Christian Bale. Christian Bale has a naturally tormented-looking face. And I just love his face. And I sometimes envisioned him being Jack at that moment. Oh my God, if my wife ever finds out, kind of thing. What did I do? You know, the kind of self-flagellation. I think Christian Bale could project that very well, and maybe Bradley Cooper too. Even though he's such a good-looking guy, I'd have to see him in other movies. He's always kind of a macho guy in Afghanistan as a super warrior. But I think in A Star Is Born, I saw some of that possibility. But I take Daffy Duck if they made a movie.
I don't have anybody in mind, and usually when I write, I never seem to imagine actors. It's just always people in my head. That's all.
Right.
Do you ever have a vision of a person? So I've heard different things. People would, some writers do picture a particular famous person as they're writing their characters. Some people will, be sitting at a coffee bar or something and just watch people on the street. And I like the way she walks. I like the way he dresses. I like his hair, and kind of put that all together. And some will clip pictures out of magazines and stick them up on a big whiteboard, and then just kind of vision it from that. Do you do any of that type of thing, or is it just from writing when you're writing the description of your characters?
I'm more of a auditory hallucinatory person. I hear their voices.
Okay.
I hear the way they talk. I don't necessarily see their faces, but I know how they talk.
I'm visual, and I said earlier that I live near a movie theater, so I do see my characters. There's a video in my head for each scene, and I sometimes pick up outfits that people wear. The opening Jack scene, where Taryn is wearing a kind of silver bombardier jacket with a very tight, slick black tights. And students wear this all the time, and particularly ones who could afford it. And so I just said, that's an outfit I think I'm going to put Taryn in when she walks into the class. And so I'm kind of visually sensitive to what people wear, what they say, how their hair, because I'm sometimes needing that to make my characters. And so I draw from what I've seen.
So I'm being handed a note here from my wife. She definitely agrees on Christian Bale, and she says Katie Seagal for Frankie. For Frankie,
Who?
Katie
for
Seagal.
Frankie. Yeah, I guess so. I could say it, but she has to be heavier.
Yeah.
I wanted it very clear that Frankie, she's middle aged, and she's a hefty, she's a strong woman, she's a solid woman.
So what's next? Is there going to be another collaboration on a sequel to this one? Something brand new? Have you talked about doing a collaboration again?
Well, I think we're both on to our own projects right now. My 13th Rizzoli Isles book is coming out June of 2022. It's called Listen to Me.
Oh, that's the next note coming down here. What is the new Rizzoli Isles book name?
It's called Listen to Me. And what I love about it is that it focuses on Jane's mother. Her, her mom's as a middle-aged housewife in Revere, and she sees things through her living room window that she's sure is a crime, and nobody believes her. So it's fun to watch amateur sleuths work when their own daughters are homicide cops that don't believe them. And then the book I'm currently working on now is an espionage novel. It's completely out of series, but it's been a lot of fun.
Nice. Gary, what's coming down the pike for you?
Something called Served Cold, as in revenge is best served cold. We haven't submitted it yet, but it's all done, ready to go. It is it centers on a writer whose third book is supposed to be a great bestseller, and everyone is very hopeful, particularly he. And he's new to the game. He was a software designer, and he always wanted to be a mystery writer. And his novel comes out and is absolutely savaged in the New York Times by a young professor who is hoping to get tenure by impressing his tenure committee and his deans, by trashing a novel in which he says is example of publishers dumbing down America with really stupid books. And the guy who wrote the book and whose dreams have been shattered, whose contracts are canceled, and all three kinds of things, he goes after the reviewer. And very dark stuff happens as their lives intermingle. And as I said, anyone who's ever gotten a bad review would love this book.
So we're almost out of time, but I got a couple fun questions. I think they're fun questions anyways. So your very first, when you started writing, both of you, when you very first started writing and you went to your first writers convention, who were you fanning out about? Who was the biggest author there that you just went all fangirl and fan guy over?
Nora Roberts. My very first writers convention was the Romance Writers of America, and it was held in Seattle, and the star was Nora Roberts, and she was and still is the queen of romantic suspense.
Did you get to talk to her?
Yes, I did.
Yeah.
She's very approachable. Yes.
Yeah, good. Gary?
I think for me, it was Michael Connelly, whose material early in my reading career was, even though he's slightly younger than I am, I cornered him at a International Thrillers Writers Conference, and just told him how much I loved his books. And I said, I teach a course in modern bestsellers. I said, if I adopt one of your novels, you come into class? And he said, sure. So he was influential in both my teaching and my writing, and was a kind of I idolized his writing. I mean, I thought his writing was terrific. In fact, Tess came to my class too. So did Stephen King. So did Robert Parker. Dennis Lehane. We had a whole bunch of people. But it was the first real conference I went to was when I met Michael Connelly.
So if you were to go when conventions start again, so your next convention that you go to, who now would you be still or be starstruck by? Would it still be Nora Roberts for you, Tess?
You know, we know all these people now.
Right.
You're right up there with all those people.
Yeah.
It's like they're all friends now. So it's like, I mean, can you be starstruck by your friend?
Yeah.
Well, so what's the best advice you got? So back at the beginning again, what is the best advice you got from whom that you would pass on to aspiring writers now?
I told you I was office mates with Robert Parker, who is my lifelong friend. He said, if you want to write a novel, don't think of a 350 chapter, a page project. Think of 35 10-page chapters and go at it that way, one at a time. And I watched him write 4 or 5 pages a day. And after a year, he had a novel, and he demystified the process for me. I mean, it's like giving a basketball-sized nut to a squirrel and said, start eating, you know? So, I mean, it just made it, and he humanized it because I watched him write at the next desk. I watched him send it off over the transom to Harper, whoever it was, a Random House, and I watched it get published. And so this is also 40 years ago, so things were a lot easier back then. But, and he also said, just read the writers you would like to, as you emulate, would like to grow up to write like. And so I tell my students, read closely, carefully, look at a book the way a carpenter looks at a house.
The late, great Michael Palmer told me something once, and he said, and he was talking about a writer who had written one book, and she decided she was going to go on the road and just promote the heck out of her book for a year. That was all she was going to do. She was going to go from bookstore to bookstore to promote her book. And he said she never sold another book because that doesn't sell books. What Michael was saying was, don't waste your time on these other things. Write your next book. You should just stay at your desk and just keep on writing books, because that's what sells. That's what sells. Your last book is your next book.
Right.
So I think it's the advice is just to stay busy and to never stop. It's like being a shark. You can't stop. You got to keep going.
What some of the advice that you give as far as promoting? So it's the person's first novel. You just came out with it. What are some of the things that you should really stress on promoting their book?
I don't know.
I
You
know.
know,
Yeah.
Well, how important to you is social media, having a website, bookstores, book talks, book signings, things like that,
we have,
swag?
yeah, I do all these things. I have all these things. I don't know if they work. I don't know what works and what doesn't work, and whether or not I'm wasting my time, or whether or not Facebook is being any help whatsoever. It's
I totally agree. And I think the younger generation feels that because they're so savvy online that they can make things happen, but I don't believe they do. I mean, it's they Instagram, whatever they tell all their friends, I got a book coming out, and as Tess said, you don't know if how successful it is, and it may be in fact a bad excuse for not getting back to your writing. Yeah, I mean,
Yes,
it's kind of like romantically believing in writer's block. I mean, it's like I've got a case of the measles. I can't write. I've got writer's block. I mean, as Robert Parker once said, "You ever hear of plumber's block?"
I guess the latest thing is bookstagrammers or something, where these people on, I don't know what it is, but one of the most uh, um, one of the coolest things I heard about promoting, because a lot of people have their, the pens, the bookmarks, the cards, maybe little postcards, things like that. One of the most ingenious things I ever heard was an author that I interviewed when travel was still a thing. She would go to different airports, and she would leave a copy of her book along with a business card or a bookmark at some of the different airports that she's been to. And that just happens to be Margaret Porter. Margaret, do you want to come up for a couple minutes and say hi?
unmute, Margaret.
Actually, I think I'm gonna have to do it for her here. Hang on here. There we go.
She's being shy.
Oops. Give me a second here. All right.
Hi.
There we go.
Hello, it's so great to hear you.
Yes, that was me. I was book bombing airports, various departure lounges when I was traveling back and forth and going places. The good thing about doing that is you can fill your suitcases with some books and drop them off in lounges, and then you've got room to buy books where you're going and bring them home.
But your suitcase is really heavy when you start.
Right.
Yes, but yeah, I travel light. I carried more books than clothes.
So Tess, how did you and Margaret meet?
Oh, gee, I think it was online, Margaret.
It was, and it involved Nora Roberts also. There was that authors listserv that was on that a whole bunch of authors, and I know Nora was one of them, and several others that I'm still friends with. And that was how we connected. But because we lived in adjacent states, we got together and met husbands and hung out, went to restaurants, lots of nice restaurants.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah, even in Antwerp, even overseas.
Right, we had up in Antwerp.
That's right, right. But
So,
it's great to see you, and wonderful to hear about this new venture of collaboration, which is something I've always thought would be so difficult to do. But I loved hearing about your process and how you and Gary managed to do this. And I look forward to reading the book so much.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. And it's so good to see you.
Oh, there you go, Tess. There's your next partner for the next book down the line. You too, Margaret. The two of you should
just
get
A long line.
So, well, thank you, Margaret, for coming on. And Margaret Porter, again, we want to plug your book real quick, the new one coming out.
Oh gosh, no, not on another author's event, but
Margaret, go ahead.
it's The Limits of Limelight, and it releases September 14th, and it's a novel about Ginger Rogers' first cousin and Ginger and her mother, and it takes place in Golden Age Hollywood, like the Hedy Lamarr book. But thanks for the opportunity. But
well, thank you, Margaret. So we are out of time now, but real quick, choose me, Tess Gerritsen, Gary Braver. Each book comes with, we do have signed book plates from both authors. So get the book, get a book plate for both of them. And they're available in our store. They're available through our website. We can ship, we can do pickup. We don't do deliveries anymore, but yeah, definitely come on in and get it. You can also get it through bookshop.org. It won't come with the signed book plates though, but if you do get it through bookshop.org, send me a message and I can send you a couple of them. Tess, Gary, thank you very much. It's been a pleasure. Gary, but pleasure seeing you again. Tess, a pleasure meeting you. And hopefully we can have both of you in the store at some point for in-person signings and talks.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chris. Yes.
And thank you everybody for joining us both on Zoom and on Facebook. I hope everybody has a good night.
Very much.
Bye.
Bye-bye.